Selection Fortnight at Sennybridge, April 1970. Now everything we had done over 6 weekends was to be compressed into a fortnight, with a number of additional features. Would we survive? About 200 had begun the process in January. There were now about 60 of us from 21 SAS, and added to this number were the successful trainees from 23 SAS, Scotland and the North. The barrack accommodation was very basic, and we were kept on the go day and night. Now for the first time we were each issued with a rifle, which had to be with us the whole time. We had to sleep with it, eat with it, and ensure that it was clean, ready for inspection at any time. It is quite difficult collecting food in a mess tin and tea in a mug while holding an SLR. In the first 2 days we had completed a night version of Brecon 1 and a rerun of the 3 times over the fan. Only this time it was pouring with rain. Then it was time for another long drag, which was basically an anti-clockwise version of the first one. The night before, we were desperately trying to dry out our kit around the stove in the centre of the barrack room. The final thing we all needed was a good night's sleep, but a Newcastle miner, who must have been used to night shifts, insisted on telling the person sleeping next to him in a loud voice all about his life. He must have been asked 10 times to stop, but each time, after a few minutes of silence, he could not resist starting up again. So when we received our rude awakening at 5 AM, I did not feel particularly refreshed. Soon we were aboard the lorries and found ourselves in some foothills south of Talibont village in the dark. I lost my way, and by the time I reached the first checkpoint, I was running late. The Major from 23 SAS looked at me rather sceptically. This made me so determined to get back in the running. Over Penny Fan, down to Storey Arms, where 40 or so trainees had stopped in the dusk to eat. I decided to overtake them all in one fell swoop, and made my way to the most westerly checkpoint, where Sergeant Major Smith made me some soup before I turned east across rough terrain to Cantref Reservoir. It was now 2 AM, and I had been on the go for about 20 hours. I crawled between the pine trees, got into my sleeping bag, cooked and ate a small tin of beans, and went out like a light. After another long day, reached the final RV, where I bathed my feet in a nearby stream and watched the blood flowing away. So ended the individual training. From now on I was in a patrol with 2 trainees from 23 SAS and a member of A Squadron named Sparks. We were dropped off on a mountain road at 11 PM and headed for a bridge 8 miles to the east. The terrain was extremely rough and marshy, and there were many ups and downs. It was a misty night, and there were no real landmarks, only 2 very small lakes on the way. The going was very slow, as we sank into mud up to our waists, only stopped from sinking further by our bergens. One of the northerners became delirious, and when he had gone into the marsh up to his waist for the umpteenth time, he refused to move and started shouting. So we proceeded to extract him, and he came to. The whole exercise seemed to go on forever, and eventually, surrounded now by thick mist, we decided to take 5 minutes. We sat down and brewed some tea. Sparks exclaimed, "There's a sheer drop here," and there it was, if we had taken 3 more paces. Later on we heard that one trainee did go over. He got away with only a few bruises, but lost his rifle, the ultimate sin. We arrived at the river, which we were supposed to cross with ropes and our equipment wrapped in floating ponchos. However, it was roaring, so we decided to chance the bridge. In the light of a half moon, we crept past a 3-tonner and headed towards the woods and the designated RV, where we were instructed to set up a recce position just inside the tree line, unseen from the road, and to record all movements until dusk. Then Sergeant Major Smith appeared and gave us our next objective. Throughout the night it poured with rain. Soaked to the skin, I was getting more and more delirious as hypothermia set in. We stopped at a cattle shed and established ourselves there among the cows, and steam rose all around us. We were glad when dawn came and we could make our way to the pickup point. The rest of our time at Sennybridge involved square bashing, learning to drive Land Rovers, although the instructor soon became impatient with me, throwing grenades, and shooting various firearms on the ranges, both static and on the move, with targets springing up in the path as we advanced. Back in Portsmouth, Mick Jordan and I were invited to Sergeant Major Smith's home for tea, and instructed to take his daughter and her friend to the cinema to see The Magic Christian, so that he could have time alone with his wife. About 40 of us had passed the selection process and were now the proud owners of the Special Air Service Berry and badge, the Wing Dagger. On returning to the barracks, I was invited into the storeroom and given a new set of kit. Mum asked me to send a photo of myself in my new beret and uniform. However, the SAS is not very keen on members being photographed, so in mufti, with my beret out of sight, I visited a photo booth. These photographs appeared very recently in Mum's box of memories. Continuation Training, Summer 1970. During the summer, the newly selected troopers were involved in several continuation training weekends. These were less intense and more about acquiring skills, now that we had proved ourselves. On one patrol I was signaller. We were quite tired when we stopped and didn't properly decide on a rota of lookouts throughout the night. Because we were supposed to stay in radio contact, we were all so easily discovered asleep by the whine of the receiver. I was woken up by someone with their arm across my neck saying, "You're dead." 2-week parachute course at Abingdon, September 1970. The first week involved intensive training by instructors who were members of the Red Devils parachute display team. Next came the first 2 balloon jumps. 4 at a time, with our instructor, we boarded the gondola cage, suspended below a barrage balloon. The gate was shut, and the ascent began. At 800 feet, there wasn't even the sound of a bird. Static lines hooked up, the instructor opened the gate. Soon it was my turn. 1, 2, 3, go! Straight down, stomach up inside me, and then a sharp tug on my shoulders. Looking up, the enormous canopy swayed from side to side. Looking down, everything looked very calm and green. Then I heard the instructor's voice, "Feet together!" So I did, and bent my knees. We had been told to expect 45 seconds in the air, but it seemed longer. However, soon the ground began to rush up towards me, and I checked everything, elbows in, feet together, knees bent, ready for the impact. Then it came, like jumping off a 6-foot wall, and I found that all that I had been taught was second nature. Rolling onto the side of my leg, ending up in the fetal position, and feeling quite elated. Then it was time to release the harness and gather up the chute in figure-of-8 fashion, vacating the dropping zone as soon as possible while looking out for other descending bodies. In the second week we moved on to Hercules transport planes and progressed from leaping out singly without any baggage to leaping out in sticks of 24 with full kit. As we approached the dropping zone, the dispatcher ordered us to stand, hook up to the static line and check each other's chutes. On came the red light, door opened to a howl and rush of wind. Green light on, and we shuffled forward as the dispatcher shouted, "Go, go, go," with his hand on the back of whoever was required to do so. The slipstream did not allow the vertical fall of the balloon jump. Rather, one was swept out almost parallel to the plane, and before knowing it, the parachute was open and you were floating down as before. One time we landed in a field full of mushrooms, and 5 of us took off our helmets and started to collect the crop, until we heard the voice of an NCO telling us to stop and get off the dropping zone. The last jump at RAF Abingdon was the most spectacular. For this drop we carried full kit and were jumping simultaneously from both doors of the plane in sticks of 24 each time the plane passed over the DZ. It was quite a sight being amongst all those parachutes. And then there was the equipment. Once I had ascertained that the chute had opened and that no one was directly below, then was the moment to release my Bergen on a rope below me, operating the two release levers together. Then, with bent knees, feet together, I waited for the first thud of the Bergen hitting the ground, knowing that the second thud of my feet hitting the ground would occur half a second later. Having completed 7 descents, I received my SAS parachute wings. Salisbury Plain, late September 1970. This was soon followed by a night jump into Salisbury Plain. This was quite different. Looking up, I could just about make out the chute, but only my speed of descent suggested that it had fully opened. I had no idea when I would hit the ground and landed on a barbed wire fence. The patrol was led by Sergeant Major Smith, who decided that I should carry the general purpose machine gun, or Gimpy, for the entire exercise. It was heavy. With daylight, we hid under camouflage nets as helicopters passed overhead. Then at night we laid the ambush. It was so poor that the enemy commander assumed it was only a decoy. Aldershot. The SEB sent me to work in the district offices at Aldershot for 3 months, where the administrator, Mr. Paddle, found me some very comfortable digs with a family at Crookham. I went out with debt collectors to cut off the power of non-payers, and with jointers who dug up roads and laid cables, sometimes receiving or pretending to receive shocks when making repairs. In customer services, the manager seemed overwhelmed with the enormous pile of letters in his in-tray. I produced 6 standard letters covering most of the problems, and by the end of my week with him the in-tray was empty. The manager of the district office said that I would make a good manager. Back in Portsmouth, I moved digs to Mrs. Smith's in Copner, sharing with students from the nearby teacher training college. Training weekends, 1971. 2 days at Hereford to learn something of the art of survival in the wild. Then to Gloucester for a signals training weekend, where I was given the job of peddling the generator, which was harder to do the faster the Morse key was being used. Signallers seemed to be a quieter, more friendly, unassuming type. A demolition training weekend in Aldershot. The instructor told us never to place pieces of shrapnel over a charge. So inevitably, once he had left us for a couple of hours, with a supply of fuse wire, detonators and gelignite, we did precisely that. With the explosion came 3 chunks of hot metal flying through the air. One landed at my feet and started a small fire, which I quickly stamped out. The same was done by another trooper, but then we walked to the other side of the crater to find another trainee just staring at the fast developing fire. I just wanted to see what would happen. The idiot. The upshot was that we had to call the fire service, and it took 3 fire engines to put the blaze out. Guard of Honour and skiing. The Special Air Service is not known for its formality, but I was involved in preparing for a Guard of Honour for Edward Heath's visit to the Royal Academy. This involved several evenings of square bashing at Chelsea Barracks and careful attention to my No. 2 uniform and boots on the big day. As he inspected us, I heard the Prime Minister say something about us being a very impressive unit. I was given a rail warrant to Aviemore to learn how to ski. The weather was good, but this meant that the nursery slopes had disappeared. For a novice like me, I found myself unable to stay upright however much I tried. I went on a pub crawl with 2 other troopers, and after 9 pints of McEwan's Export became immobile, and was left by an AA box while a Land Rover was summoned to collect me. Belgium, April 1971. After a meal of steak and chips in the Students' Union cafeteria, I joined the Land Rover party going to Brize Norton. It was dark as we took our equipment onto the Hercules, and it didn't seem long before we were being told to stand and hook up to the static line. The weight of everything was causing my knees to buckle, so it was a relief when the green light went on, and I just fell out of the plane, releasing the load, so it was suspended from my waist by a rope. And very soon, thud, thud, I was down. The ground was marshy, so it was quite a struggle getting the equipment and parachute off the dropping zone. As part of a recruitment drive, reporters from a Portsmouth newspaper came along with us. Eventually the 8-man patrol grouped and headed off through a forest and over fields, bumping into a number of cows on the way. By dawn we had arrived at the intended base camp. 2 of us were assigned a sabotage mission, meeting an agent who gave us a supply of gelignite and detonators. We made our way to a railway line, which the agent had instructed us to blow up. Having set off the charge, there were soon motorcycles, jeeps and lorries all around, lots of voices and activity. Eventually it began to subside, and we were able to make a silent exit. We ran and ran until we came to a haystack where we collapsed and slept for 6 hours. We continued our journey the following day, keeping to hedgerows, until we eventually came to the forest which marked the border over which we would be safe. The border was marked by a river along which members of the full-time Belgian SAS patrolled. It seemed that we would have some difficulty in getting across unobserved, even if we waited until it was dark. However, we watched the regularity of the patrols for some time and noticed how non-vigilant they were, strolling along, chatting and smoking with rifles slung over their shoulders. When dusk began to descend, we made our move and got across without any opposition at all.